I think really across the board, the medical community is in a little bit of a holding pattern for indications outside of COVID-19, and it's really hard to find an area within medicine or ongoing research that isn't impacted by this.
And now, from San Francisco and the UCSF Rosenman Institute, the Health Technology Podcast, with your host, Christine Winoto.
Hello everyone, it's been a month since we are sheltered in place here in San Francisco. I hope you and your family are safe and healthy. Our team at UCSF Rosenman Institute is working hard to continuously provide all kinds of resources to support our community, and we hope this podcast will also help you stay informed and make you feel connected. Our guest today is Heather Bowerman, CEO and founder of DotLab, a molecular diagnostics company focused on women's health. These days, like many founders, Heather finds her company's playbook changing every day. Heather and I discussed how this new environment impacted her work and how she is coping during this pandemic as a CEO and new parent. DotLab is developing DotEndo, the world's first non-invasive test to confirm endometriosis, a debilitating disease that affects 1 in 10 women worldwide. What about that as an unmet need? The standard of care has not changed in 100 years in this space. Historically, diagnostic has been a hard space to raise funding in, and the same has been true for companies in women's health. Heather has first-hand insight into these issues, as you will hear. Despite all that, DotLab closed a $10 million Series A round last summer. I hope you enjoy our conversation, and if you like what you hear today, please subscribe to our series on Apple Podcasts. But thank you for taking the time today to talk to me. We've known each other for a while now. I've been following you since the very beginning, and it's great accomplishment that you and your team have done. Talking also about timing that you guys completed your round before this whole COVID-19 outbreak happened. I felt life is all about timing sometimes. And so, but anyway, I thought maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And I wish I can ask, did you even predict that this thing happened, that you can just time it where the funding happened?
Yeah, I definitely did not predict it, but I think, like you said, Christine, it's just so much about life and building companies comes down to timing. And so we did at DotLab do our Series A financing last summer, and our key clinical validation study was actually just published a couple of weeks ago. So I would love to talk about that as well.
Yeah.
But in this environment, I think that seeing the renewed focus and energy around diagnostics is, I think, potentially a silver lining of the pandemic. And I think, certainly an appreciation for where we are as a company is something that I think about every day as well, to be able to be in this position to further develop the technology.
Yeah. So, for some of our listeners who don't really know your technology, maybe you can tell us what it is.
Sure. So DotLab is a molecular diagnostics company. We're based in San Francisco and also have a laboratory on the East Coast. And we're focused on women's health, particularly endometriosis, which is such an exciting challenge because endometriosis is an incredibly prevalent disease. It's heterogeneous. And the standard of care from a diagnostic standpoint has not improved or evolved in really over 100 years since laparoscopy was first performed. So endometriosis is the cause of over half of unexplained infertility cases. It's debilitating to patients who have it, most of whom don't know that they do. And so, from a quality of life standpoint, the complexity of the biological problem and the unmet need, I think my team and I have been energized to tackle this problem. And another aspect of DotLab that I'm excited about, or just makes me more keen to work on this problem, is that unlike a lot of areas where you can point to unmet need on the diagnostic side, endometriosis has a number of therapies available, but it is that aspect of confirming active disease that is the barrier for patients getting treatment earlier when the disease is more correctable.
Mm-hmm. And tell us why why do you choose this particular disease to tackle?
Well, I think that the prevalence is so high, but also the comorbidities for endometriosis are numerous and understudied as well. So, as an example, one comorbidity of endometriosis that folks have started to look at is ovarian cancer. Many labs around the world for years have been looking at the relationship between endometriosis and ovarian cancer. But at the end of the day, until the diagnostic challenge is solved for endometriosis, there's only so much that we can unpack on the research side. And I think that's true not only for oncology, but also on the autoimmune disease side. So endometriosis is known to be closely linked to rheumatoid arthritis, but again, the same challenge. So I think the two aspects that are most exciting to me are being able to potentially positively impact patient lives by having a better understanding of the disease and being able to diagnose it, and also the downstream implications for comorbidities of endometriosis.
And you mentioned earlier about you recently completed the study. Can you tell us more?
Absolutely. So a couple of weeks ago, our clinical validation study was published in the American Journal of OBGYN, AJOG, or the Gray Journal as it's called. And this is the first peer-reviewed publication that shows biomarkers that can differentiate between endometriosis and other gynecologic pathologies with a high accuracy. And we did that across 2 independent sample sets. So the publication shows an AUC of 0.94. And
what does AUC stand for?
So it's looking at it's one way to measure the accuracy. So the sensitivity and specificity of the assay is what we are looking to establish with this publication. And I think the philosophy behind publishing this work is that for us to commercialize a test that is looking to confirm active disease, this is not a risk profile test. It's not a genetic test predicting whether patients might develop endometriosis in the future. This is really intended to confirm active disease or not. It's incredibly important to share our work as we go and think about intellectual property, et cetera. But the publication is available in the Gray Journal for people to check out. And another thing, Christine, that is really exciting about this study is we showed that neither the phase of the menstrual cycle nor the use of hormonal medication significantly impacted the expression levels of the biomarkers that we're looking at.
That's interesting. So that's great. Despite this pandemic, that you guys can complete the clinical study and publish it. I assume the publishing part, maybe, that's what happened during the outbreak. So those tend to be done behind the scene remotely anyway. How has this pandemic impact your company and your team? How do you adjust and how do you adapt?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think the answer to that is evolving every day for everybody. But I think from the standpoint of our day-to-day operations as a company, I think we are fortunate in so many ways because we have the North Star of just clarity around what we're looking to accomplish on the research and development and clinical operations sides, leading up to commercialization of our tests. So I think as we think about future research collaborations, like so many companies that are pursuing clinical studies, elective surgeries are being outright postponed for the moment, as they should be in light of COVID-19, but that has a direct impact on timelines for companies like ours. I think looking at the impact on patients is also significant for the patients we're looking to serve. So the American Society for Reproductive Medicine guidance came out a couple of weeks ago recommending that all IVF procedures be postponed for the foreseeable future in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think really across the board, the medical community is in a little bit of a holding pattern for indications outside of COVID-19, and it's really hard to find an area within medicine or ongoing research that isn't impacted by this.
Yeah. So how do you, we are faced with that. At least my first week, I felt like my productivity were down. I tend to go to the refrigerators more often than I used to. But how, as a leader, how do you, keep the morale up during this difficult time for, the country and yet keep moving forward? You still have to meet certain milestones that you need to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all about communication, both internally and externally at this point, mostly with our board. So especially since this situation has been a moving target and evolving every week or every day, I think just thinking about new ways to communicate internally and just keep in touch with the board about how we're handling any number of challenges that we're encountering. So as a specific example, one of the things that we're noticing as a company is that the organic discussion that happens when you're all together in an office isn't possible when every interaction you're having with a colleague is scheduled over Zoom. I think one of the goals that I had was to figure out how do I keep conversation going naturally within our teams. And so I just put recently a coffee time on the calendar where I'll be logged into Zoom and everyone in the company has access to the meeting and can pop in just to chat informally and try to preserve some of that organic discussion that happens when you're in an office. I think also just taking a hard look at our day-to-day activities and saying, these particular aspects of our work may be slowed down, but there are these other items that we would have tabled until maybe next quarter that we can start tackling now while we are in a holding pattern due to COVID-19 on some other projects. So I think the two biggest things would be just ongoing communication and looking at the sequence of when we're working on different projects so that we can continue to move our company forward, but also just recalibrate to the new environment.
Mm-hmm. I like that, the idea about the Zoom at certain time for just be there. That almost feel like you allow people to pop in and out of your office, except you're not in the office.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's Zoom is great, but it can also be a little bit awkward, right? Because you always need to keep your microphone muted if you're not talking. It can feel a little bit formal. So whatever we can do to think of ways to be creative and keep the energy up and the morale up, as you were saying, within our teams, it's just so important.
Mm-hmm. This podcast is sponsored by Brown Ratnick's Global Life Sciences Group, a team of legal professionals that helps life science companies, lenders, and investors around the world turn good science into good business. Learn more at brownratnick.com. And how do you manage your conversation with your investors? Is there any advice that they gave you that you found useful that other people might also find it useful?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, our investors are fantastic and have been extremely helpful during this time. I think specific examples would be just, looking at the guidance as it becomes available for should we or should we not apply for the PPP loans. I mean, that's been a hot topic this week for a lot of companies, and then taking a hard look at is it ethical, so to speak, for venture-backed companies to apply for these loans. And so I think every day there's really something new that I'm thinking about. And I think one of the challenges of running a startup is that we're usually operating on maybe 30% of the information that we'd like to have. And so absolutely, I mean, the investors that we have at DotLab are a fantastic sounding board for those day-to-day types of questions. I think also just serving as a sounding board or sanity check for how we're thinking about sequencing our priorities and just moving our previously well-defined playbooks, kind of just really putting those out the window for the next few weeks or months, and thinking about what we can do until the pandemic subsides a bit.
Yeah, and I think the fact that you also successfully raised your funding pretty, like only during the summer, so it gives you more wiggle room in terms of your execution, implementation of that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes and no. On one hand, absolutely. I think we're very fortunate to have the financial support that we do. But on the other hand, I think for any venture-backed company, in many ways, the clock is ticking, and you have a certain burn rate locked in as you either progress or not towards your milestones. So I think as a founder, one thing that I know I'm thinking about, and my founder friends are thinking about, is really just this basic question of, okay, we're in a holding pattern. How do I rethink our day-to-day priorities and continue to chip away towards our milestones when maybe we don't have the resources that we thought we would. So absolutely, we're fortunate, but it's a unique time. I think it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. And I think really every startup will be rethinking their playbook for the next year and having to take another look at it maybe every month as we start to understand more about where COVID-19 is going.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody else today how they recommend to look at their, extending their runway, looking at the scenario of make sure that you have enough between 18 to 24 months. And that can be pretty long for a startup. And because we don't know what's the climate's going to be like for fundraising when people are start to investing again. And I think having built a good relationship during the good time helps when you need them during the hard time. But I think at the same time, I was talking to somebody who less than 6 months ago started a company and they're just about to do their fundraising. And that can be very challenging. And looking back, you had your up and down and you started DotLabs. Of course, now when people hear like, oh, you've successfully raised the financing last summer, it seems like an overnight success, but people don't realize that was a lot of hard work on your end. Can you maybe give us, some of our listeners about that challenges that you face and how you overcome it and how you become, where you are today?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways that I think about that question that relate to being in the diagnostics world and then also being in women's health. So I think on the diagnostic side, I think, venture capital arguably may not be the right vehicle to finance early stage diagnostics companies because the venture capitalist requirements require certain returns in a certain time frame that aren't necessarily with or congruous with what diagnostics companies are able to achieve on timelines that make sense for both parties. I think the sources of financing that can be helpful in the diagnostics world in the early stages are, SBIR grants, maybe doing a couple of friends and family rounds of financing, just really thinking about, what's really required in order to get to that next level so that we can be eligible for venture capital financing, and do we even need VC? I think that's certainly a fair question, depending on the space that you're in diagnostics. On the women's health side, that really has just changed so much in the last few years, as you know. Some people call it femtech. I call it women's health, but whatever the semantics might be around the space, I think it's an area that's really blossomed within health tech as something that investors are talking about, but something that I find to be challenging and something that I hope evolves within women's health is that the types of companies that are really receiving that venture backing are also solving problems that are key challenges within women's health. I think that there are a lot of opportunities on the digital health side, on the services side, for sure. And we can move the needle in a lot of ways on problems that have to do with patient access to services. But when it comes to looking at, the top 5 or 10 challenges medically within women's health, I think we're not seeing venture capital activity map back to those key challenges. And so, endometriosis, I think in the last 5 years has garnered a lot more attention than maybe in the past couple of decades prior to that combined. But still, it's an emerging area, and it's one that is not well defined biologically, as we were talking about. And that means both a lot of opportunity and a lot of challenges, where your first couple of meetings are really focused on the educational side, so to speak, where there's a lot of investment for founders in women's health to educate potential investors about the problems that we're working on. Whether those investors are men or women, I think that's usually the case in a lot of these areas in women's health.
So going back to your early days, based on what you're saying, your early funding tend to be more from the non-dilutive funding and friends and family.
Yeah, and I would recommend that. I think that as a diagnostics company, and maybe more broadly across medtech, you have different timelines that don't necessarily match what VCs are looking for. And so to get to that proof of concept or to get to that first prototype, is going to look really different than what your peers in digital health or kind of pure tech plays might be able to crank out. We're not living in the world of the MVP, right? So
Right.
it's I think SBIR is something that I would really recommend to people that it's there for a reason. It's a great vehicle for getting medtech companies off the ground, and then once you know whether there's a there where it makes sense to go out to raise, then do it. But I think if I think you have to just have your eyes open as a founder to what it is that venture capital can actually offer you, and when the right timing is, and only. I think only when you have the context of the space, et cetera, can we really make a blanket statement. But in my particular case, that's what I found to be helpful.
Yeah. So changing subject a little bit in terms, like, you recently had a baby. So how, I know it's a question that we always, somehow is being asked to women, but not to men. But I feel like I can ask you because I'm also a working mom. And I have no bias when I ask that question. And oftentimes we, as women, we tend to do more when it comes to taking care of the childcare part. At least that's the reality that we face right now.
Yeah, I did. It's funny how in life, different things seem to happen all at once on the personal and professional side, and that was very much the case for me. But yeah, I did welcome my first child in late 2019 before the holidays. He's amazing, and being a new parent is always a journey, and it's new territory. But I think especially in light of now being a new parent amidst a global pandemic, my journey looks a little bit different than I thought it was going to. But I think most importantly, I am so grateful to have had the opportunity to become a new parent. I think that whether you're a new parent or you have kids in school and now you're facing, how do I homeschool my kids and also do my job, whether you're the parent of a child who is graduating into what's likely to be an unprecedented recession that we're going into. I think we're just facing so many challenges right now as a country and as a world that while my particular journey as a new parent might look different than I thought it was going to, I think I'm in no way unique, regardless of a child's age. I think we're all going to be navigating this situation and doing our best. But
Yeah.
But absolutely, I mean, as a new mom and or a new parent who's also running a startup, there's a lot to think about as far as how to structure your day, how to balance your time. I don't necessarily like the word balance, but
Right.
at the same time, you do have to be realistic about, okay, how do I think about my needs on the personal side, and along with my teammates at the company, make sure that we're remaining productive and executing against our goals and staying sane. It's not easy.
Yeah. I mean, someone used to tell me it's not about balance, it's about priority. I think there's no such thing as balance, I guess. It's all about which one do you want to put. Because balance is just make you force that you have to do everything. And as a result, sometimes you can't just do everything. And also, pointing out what you're saying about journey, I think oftentimes in life, we feel like, and if we do everything right, our journey is all mapped out. But I think 90% of the time, you face some things that completely unexpected. And then actually, because of that, you run into something that might be really interesting. If you plan everything, it's like, oh, it's not as fun as you thing it would be.
Yeah, I would agree. I think as founders, we need to be stubborn about our goals, but flexible about our methods. And this pandemic, I think, is just the pinnacle of that in some ways, where our methods are changing, our goals as a company are changing. The macro environment is certainly evolving, but just so our goals are clear, we are able to come up with a plan. And so in that way, we're really fortunate, as we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's also keep you on your feet all the time with all this, new information every day. And again, I hope that being a founder of a startup, it's like uncertainties is part of the DNA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully because of that, a lot of the things that you have navigated through all these years prepare you to what's coming next.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's true. Definitely.
Yeah. So, no, this is great. Well, thank you for your time, and great job on getting where you are today. And congratulations for being a mom. That's another kid that you have in addition to your startup.
That's very true.
Yeah. And they've actually, I always tell a lot of the entrepreneurs, startup is just like a kid, when they're really young, you have to pay a lot of attention. You have to do a lot of nurturing. As they grow, you need to be able to delegate more and let go a little bit more, so then the company can grow bigger. So in a way, it's a good parallel, having a kid and having a startup, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, we get it all done somehow.
Yeah. So, okay, great. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening today, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on iTunes.